On a crisp September morning in 2023, Dr. Sarah Bennett woke up at 5 a.m. in her elegant Atlanta home. Her Louis Vuitton suitcase stood packed and ready by the door, containing everything she needed for the prestigious medical conference in Boston, where she was scheduled to deliver a keynote speech the next day. As she sipped her morning coffee, Sarah double-checked her first-class ticket on her phone. The $1,200 ticket had been a necessary expense. At 45 years old and standing at the peak of her career, she believed in traveling comfortably. After 15 years as a neurosurgeon saving countless lives, she had earned it. "Mom, don't forget to send me pictures from Boston," called out her teenage daughter Jasmine from upstairs. Sarah smiled, remembering how proud Jasmine had been when she learned her mother would be speaking at the annual Neurosurgery Summit. It wasn't just another conference. It was the biggest gathering of neurosurgeons in the country. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from her colleague, Dr. Patricia Williams. "Ready for tomorrow's big speech? You're going to knock them dead." Sarah texted back a quick, "Absolutely," before calling her Uber to the airport. The Uber driver, an elderly man named George, chatted pleasantly during the 30-minute drive. "A doctor, huh? That's impressive. My wife was saved by a neurosurgeon last year. You people do God's work." Sarah shared some stories from her practice, carefully leaving out the more technical details. Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport was already bustling when she arrived at 7 a.m. for her 9 a.m. flight. Sarah had always believed in arriving early. It was a habit that had served her well throughout her career. She wheeled her suitcase through the sliding doors, the sound of announcements and rolling luggage filling the air. At the check-in counter, Sarah was greeted by a young airline employee named Linda. "Good morning. Checking in for the Boston flight?" Linda asked, her fingers flying over the keyboard. Sarah handed over her ID and confirmed her flight details. "First class to Boston, window seat 2A, Linda announced, printing out the boarding pass. "You know, we don't see many surgeons in first class who look like..." Linda caught herself mid-sentence and quickly changed the subject. Sarah felt a familiar twinge in her stomach. She had heard comments like these throughout her career. Making her way through security, Sarah noticed several eyes following her designer outfit and diamond earrings. She had learned long ago not to let such stares bother her. Her mother had always told her, "Success is the best revenge against prejudice." After clearing security, Sarah stopped at her favorite coffee shop in Terminal B. "The usual, Dr. Bennett?" asked Maria, the barista who had been serving her for years. Sarah ordered her vanilla latte and a blueberry muffin, then found a quiet corner to review her presentation one last time. Her speech was important. It detailed a groundbreaking surgical technique she had developed that reduced recovery time by 40%. The medical journal articles about her innovation had already created buzz in the surgical community. Tomorrow's presentation would be the first time she demonstrated it to a live audience of her peers. As she waited at her gate, Sarah called her mother. "Everything okay, baby?" her mother asked, concern in her voice. Even at 45, Sarah was still her mother's baby. "All good, Mom. Just waiting to board. I'll call you when I land in Boston." Looking around the gate area, Sarah noticed she was the only black person in the first-class waiting area. It wasn't unusual. She had grown used to being the only one in many spaces throughout her career. From medical school to the operating room, she had always stood out. At 8:30 a.m., the gate agent began pre-boarding announcements. Sarah gathered her things, straightened her crisp white blazer, and stood up. She had done this hundreds of times before. Another routine flight to another medical conference. But as she approached the gate, something felt different. The gate agent's smile seemed forced, her eyes narrowing slightly as she looked at Sarah's first-class boarding pass. Sarah felt that familiar sixth sense, the one that had warned her of trouble countless times before, begin to tingle. "Ma'am, could you step aside for a moment?" the gate agent asked, her voice carrying across the quiet gate area. "There seems to be an irregularity with your ticket." Sarah's heart sank. She knew what was coming. She had seen it before, heard stories from other successful black professionals. But this time, it would be different. This time, she wouldn't stay quiet. What happened next would change not just Sarah's life, but the entire airline industry. The gate agent, whose name tag read Karen Miller, held Sarah's boarding pass up to the light as if checking for a watermark. Several other first-class passengers walked past, their tickets receiving nothing more than a quick scan before they were waved through. "I'm sorry, but I need to verify this ticket," Karen announced loudly, causing nearby passengers to turn and stare. Sarah felt her cheeks grow warm, but kept her voice steady. "I purchased this ticket directly from your airline's website. Is there a specific problem?" Karen ignored her question, instead picking up her phone. "Let me call my supervisor." She turned her back on Sarah, speaking in hushed tones. Meanwhile, more passengers filed past, some throwing curious glances at the scene unfolding at the gate. A young white businessman approached with his first-class ticket. Karen paused her phone call just long enough to scan his boarding pass and wave him through with a bright smile. Sarah watched this interaction, her hand tightening around the handle of her leather briefcase. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The flight was scheduled to depart in 20 minutes, and Sarah's keynote speech materials were in her checked luggage. Missing this flight wasn't an option. Finally, a man in an airline supervisor's uniform approached. His badge identified him as Thomas Green. "What seems to be the issue here?" he asked Karen, not acknowledging Sarah's presence. "This passenger," Karen emphasized the word strangely, "claims to have a first-class ticket, but something doesn't look right." She handed Sarah's boarding pass to Thomas, who barely glanced at it before turning to Sarah. "Ma'am, how did you obtain this ticket?" His tone suggested he was speaking to a child, not a renowned neurosurgeon. Sarah pulled out her phone, opening her email. "I booked it directly through your airline's app. Here's my confirmation email, my receipt for $1,200, and my frequent flyer status showing I've flown first class with your airline 12 times this year alone." Thomas barely looked at the evidence. "Unfortunately, we're going to need to do a more thorough investigation. You'll have to take a later flight." At this point, several passengers had stopped to watch. A young woman in the economy line had her phone out, quietly recording the interaction. Sarah noticed this and felt a small surge of relief. At least there would be evidence. "This is unacceptable," Sarah stated firmly. "I have a keynote speech to deliver tomorrow morning. I'm a platinum member of your airline's frequent flyer program. There is no valid reason to deny me boarding." "Are you refusing to comply with airline staff?" Thomas asked loudly, his hand moving toward his radio. "Because we can call security if needed." Sarah felt her heart racing, but kept her exterior calm. Years of performing complex brain surgeries under pressure had taught her to maintain composure in stressful situations. She pulled out her hospital ID and business card. "I am Dr. Sarah Bennett, Chief of Neurosurgery at Atlanta General Hospital. I demand to know the specific irregularity with my ticket. Is it the barcode, the booking number, or is it something else entirely?" Her clear, authoritative tone caused several nearby passengers to murmur in support. An elderly white woman in first class spoke up. "I've seen Dr. Bennett on the news. She saved my grandson's life last year. This is ridiculous." But Thomas and Karen remained unmoved. Thomas reached for his radio. "Security to gate B15, please." Within minutes, 2 security officers appeared, their hands resting on their belts. "Dr. Bennett," one officer said, reading from the information Karen had given him, "we need you to step away from the gate." As Sarah was led away from the gate, she heard the final boarding call for her flight. Through the window, she could see her checked bag being removed from the luggage cart. Her phone buzzed. It was the conference organizer wondering where she was. Several passengers were now openly filming the incident. The young woman who had first started recording approached Sarah and handed her a business card. "I'm Amanda Chen, civil rights attorney." What they just did? That's textbook discrimination. "Call me." Sarah took the card, her mind already racing ahead. She had encountered racism before, in medical school, in hospitals, in upscale restaurants. But this time was different. This time, she had witnesses, videos, and a pattern of behavior she could prove. As she watched her flight take off without her, Sarah made a decision. This wouldn't be just another incident swept under the rug. This would be the case that exposed everything. The humiliation didn't end with being denied boarding. 2 security officers escorted Sarah through the terminal, past hundreds of staring passengers. Her designer heels clicked against the polished floor as she walked with her head held high, though her hands trembled slightly. "This way, ma'am," one officer directed, leading her to a small security office. Inside, the room was cold and sterile, with harsh fluorescent lighting and uncomfortable metal chairs. A security camera blinked in the corner, recording everything. Sarah took out her phone to call the conference organizers, but the senior security officer, Officer Jenkins, stopped her. "Please put your phone away until we complete our investigation." His tone left no room for argument. For the next 2 hours, Sarah sat in that tiny room while different airline officials came in and out, each asking the same questions over and over. Where did she get the ticket? How did she pay for it? Could she prove her identity? Each time, she provided the same clear, documented answers. Meanwhile, her phone kept buzzing. Messages from the conference organizers, worried texts from her daughter Jasmine, and missed calls from her colleagues piled up. The keynote speech she was supposed to give, representing months of groundbreaking research, would now never happen. Finally, a new airline representative entered the room. Unlike the others, she wore an expensive suit and introduced herself as Patricia Reynolds, the airline's regional director of customer relations. "Dr. Bennett," Patricia began, her voice dripping with rehearsed sympathy, "we sincerely apologize for any inconvenience. After thorough investigation, we've confirmed your ticket was valid. We'd be happy to book you on the next available flight to Boston." Sarah looked at her watch. It was already 2 p.m. Her speech had been scheduled for 9 a.m. the next morning. "The next available flight won't help me make my keynote address, will it?" she asked quietly. Patricia shifted uncomfortably. "We can offer you a voucher for future travel." "A voucher?" Sarah's laugh was bitter. "I just spent 2 hours being treated like a criminal. My reputation has been damaged. My research presentation was cancelled, and you're offering me a voucher." Just then, Sarah's phone buzzed again. It was a message from Amanda Chen, the civil rights attorney who had witnessed the incident. "Dr. Bennett, multiple passengers sent me their videos of what happened. This is a clear case of racial discrimination. Let me help you fight this." As if reading her mind, Patricia quickly added, "Of course, we'd be happy to provide compensation if you're willing to sign a non-disclosure agreement about today's unfortunate misunderstanding." Sarah stood up, gathering her belongings with deliberate calm. "Ms. Reynolds, what happened today wasn't a misunderstanding. It was discrimination, plain and simple, and I'm not interested in being silenced." As she walked out of the security office, Sarah's phone buzzed with another message. This one was from her daughter. "Mom, you're trending on Twitter. Someone posted a video of what they did to you. People are really angry." Sarah stopped in her tracks and opened Twitter. The video of her being denied boarding had already been viewed over 100,000 times. Comments were pouring in, many from other Black professionals sharing similar experiences with the same airline. In the terminal bathroom, Sarah finally allowed herself a moment alone. Looking in the mirror, she saw her carefully applied makeup was still perfect, her silk blouse still crisp. On the outside, she appeared unruffled, but inside, she felt a storm brewing. Her phone rang again. This time it was Dr. Patricia Williams, her colleague from Atlanta. "Sarah, I just saw the video. The Medical Association is furious. They want to know what they can do to help." Sarah took a deep breath, her resolve strengthening. She had spent her entire career breaking barriers in medicine, proving herself over and over again. But this wasn't just about her anymore. This was about every person who had ever been humiliated, doubted, or denied service because of their race. As she left the airport, Sarah made 2 calls. The first was to Amanda Chen, the civil rights attorney. The second was to her own attorney, who had helped her navigate contract negotiations throughout her medical career. "Get ready," she told them both. "We're not just filing a complaint. We're going to expose everything, every incident, every policy, every person involved in this systematic discrimination, and we're going to make sure it never happens to anyone else again." The real battle was about to begin. The next morning, Sarah sat in Amanda Chen's downtown law office, surrounded by stacks of papers and multiple computer screens displaying various social media feeds. The video of her airport incident had now reached over 1 million views, and her phone hadn't stopped ringing with interview requests from major news networks. "Look at this," Amanda said, turning her laptop towards Sarah. "In the last 24 hours, we've received over 200 emails from other passengers who experienced similar discrimination with this airline. Some even have their own videos. Sarah leaned forward, examining the evidence they gathered. Security camera footage from the airport had been obtained, showing clear angles of the entire incident. The timestamps proved she had been detained for exactly 2 hours and 17 minutes. What's most interesting, Amanda continued, pulling out a thick folder, is this pattern we've uncovered. In the past year alone, there have been 43 reported incidents of black passengers being denied boarding on first-class flights with this airline. All of them had valid tickets. Sarah's own documentation was impressive. She had saved every email, every booking confirmation, and every frequent flyer statement from the past 5 years. Her platinum member status was clearly displayed, showing she had spent over $50,000 with the airline in the previous year alone. They picked the wrong person to mess with, remarked James Patterson, Sarah's personal attorney, who had just arrived for the meeting. A respected neurosurgeon with a spotless record, multiple awards, and a history of first-class travel, they couldn't have chosen a worse person to discriminate against. As they talked, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from her daughter Jasmine. "Mom, your story is on the morning news. They're calling you a hero for standing up to discrimination." The legal team had already filed initial paperwork for a major discrimination lawsuit. But Sarah wanted more than just monetary damages. She wanted systematic change. "Look at this," Amanda said, pointing to her screen. "Former airline employees are reaching out to us. They're willing to testify about the unofficial policies they were trained to follow, policies that encouraged extra verification for minority passengers in first class." One former employee had saved training materials that used coded language to suggest certain passengers should be subject to additional scrutiny. Another had documented internal emails discussing ways to maintain the airline's image in first-class cabins. Sarah spent hours reviewing passenger statements. A black executive who was asked to move to economy despite his first-class ticket. A famous musician who was denied access to the first-class lounge. A retired judge who was questioned about her ticket until she missed her flight. Each case alone might be dismissed as a misunderstanding, Amanda explained. But together, they show a clear pattern of systematic discrimination. The team was also investigating the airline's hiring practices. Out of 500 first-class flight attendants at major hubs, only 12 were black. Among gate agents handling first-class boarding, the numbers were even worse. Sarah's personal story had become the catalyst for something much bigger. While reviewing documents, her phone lit up with a message from the American Medical Association. "Dr. Bennett, we stand with you. Our 300,000 members are ready to support your fight for justice." The hospital where Sarah worked had also issued a strong statement of support. "Dr. Bennett is one of our most distinguished surgeons. The treatment she received is unacceptable and reflects ongoing discrimination that must be addressed." As the day progressed, Amanda's team discovered more evidence. Security footage showed white passengers boarding with first-class tickets facing no additional scrutiny. The airline's own records revealed a disturbing pattern of random security checks that disproportionately targeted minority passengers. "They'll probably offer to settle," James warned. "They want to keep this quiet." Sarah shook her head firmly. "This isn't about money. This is about changing a system that has humiliated countless people. We're taking this all the way." By evening, the team had compiled enough evidence to file a comprehensive lawsuit that would be impossible to ignore. The documentation was damning, the witness list was growing, and public support was overwhelming. As Sarah left the law office that night, she received one final text from the young woman who had first started recording the incident at the gate. "Thank you for being brave enough to fight back. You're giving voice to all of us who couldn't." The stage was set for a legal battle that would shake the airline industry to its core. 1 month after the airport incident, Sarah found herself walking into the federal courthouse in downtown Atlanta. The massive media presence outside made it clear this was no ordinary discrimination case. News vans lined the street, and reporters called out questions as she walked up the courthouse steps with her legal team. Inside the courtroom, Sarah sat straight-backed in her tailored navy suit, watching as her attorney Amanda Chen delivered the opening statement. The airline had sent their top legal team, 5 expensive lawyers from a prestigious firm, all armed with thick binders and serious expressions. "Your Honor," Amanda began, her voice clear and confident, "this case is about more than one incident. It's about exposing a system of discrimination that has gone unchecked for years. We have evidence of over 200 similar incidents, all documented, all following the same pattern. The airline's lead attorney, Richard Harrison, tried to paint the incident as a simple misunderstanding. The airline has clear policies against discrimination, he argued. What happened to Dr. Bennett was an unfortunate error in judgment by a few employees who have since been terminated. But Sarah's team was prepared. They called their first witness, a former airline training manager named Michael Rodriguez, who had recently quit his job to testify in this case. Yes, Michael testified. We were trained to watch for passengers who didn't fit the first-class profile. It was never written down, but everyone knew what that meant. We called it maintaining standards. The courtroom grew silent as Michael described the subtle ways discrimination was built into the system. Code words in training materials, unofficial guidelines for gate agents, performance reviews that rewarded those who maintained the right image in first class. During a break in proceedings, Sarah checked her phone to find messages of support pouring in. The Black Medical Association had organized a rally outside the courthouse. Civil rights organizations were filing supporting briefs. Even some of the airline's own current employees were secretly sending information to Sarah's legal team. The airline's lawyers tried to discredit each witness, but the evidence was overwhelming. Security camera footage showed clear differences in how passengers were treated. Internal emails revealed discussions about passenger profiles that were clearly based on race. The most powerful moment came when Amanda played a montage of videos showing similar incidents at different airports. Black passengers being questioned, delayed, or denied boarding, all with valid first-class tickets. Look at these timestamps, Amanda pointed out. These incidents happened at different airports, with different staff, over several years. This isn't about a few bad employees. This is about a company culture that encourages discrimination. During cross-examination, the airline's lawyers tried to suggest that Sarah had been aggressive or uncooperative during the incident. But the videos showed her calm demeanor, and multiple witnesses testified to her professional behavior throughout the ordeal. Dr. Bennett remained composed even as she was being humiliated, testified another passenger who had witnessed the incident. She provided all requested documentation. She was treated like a criminal simply for having a first-class ticket while being black. The airline's defense began to crumble when Amanda introduced evidence of internal communications. Emails between managers discussed maintaining passenger expectations in first class. Training materials used coded language about passenger profiles that matched typical stereotypes. During a lunch break, Sarah received an unexpected call. It was from Karen Miller, the gate agent who had denied her boarding. "I want to testify," Karen said, her voice shaking. "What we did was wrong, and it wasn't the first time. I can't live with it anymore." The airline's lawyers immediately called for a recess. Behind closed doors, they'd offered a substantial settlement, millions of dollars in exchange for Sarah's silence. "They're scared," Amanda explained. "They know Karen's testimony could expose everything. This is their last attempt to keep it quiet." Sarah didn't hesitate. "No deal," she said firmly. "This was never about money. This is about changing the system." As the day drew to a close, Sarah stood outside the courthouse, surrounded by supporters. Reporters thrust microphones toward her, asking for comments. "This case is bigger than me," she told them. "It's about every person who has ever been judged not by their ticket, but by their appearance, and we're just getting started." The first day of the trial had ended, but Sarah knew the real battle was still ahead. Tomorrow, Karen would take the stand, and the airline's carefully constructed facade would begin to crack. The courtroom fell silent as Karen Miller took the witness stand. The former gate agent looked different now. Gone was the stern authority figure from the airport. Instead, she appeared nervous, constantly adjusting her glasses as she faced the packed courtroom. Karen took a deep breath. "We had official training about customer service, but there were unofficial meetings too. Our supervisors would tell us to maintain standards in first class. They never directly mentioned race, but they'd show us pictures of ideal." The airline's lawyers shifted uncomfortably in their seats as Karen continued to reveal internal practices. She described a point system where gate agents were quietly rewarded for maintaining the right atmosphere in first class. Those who questioned these practices were often reassigned to less desirable gates or shifts. The day I stopped Dr. Bennett, Karen testified, her voice cracking, I was following what I'd been trained to do. We were told to find irregularities with certain passengers' tickets. We always found something if we looked hard enough. During cross-examination, the airline's attorneys tried to discredit Karen, suggesting she was a disgruntled ex-employee. But then Amanda presented Karen's employment records. 15 years of outstanding performance reviews, multiple awards for customer service. The next witness was even more damaging. Thomas Green, the supervisor who had supported Karen's decision that day, had agreed to testify in exchange for immunity from personal liability. Yes, we had quotas, Thomas admitted. We were expected to screen out the certain percentage of passengers who didn't fit the first-class profile. It was never written down, but everyone knew what that meant. Sarah watched as Thomas revealed years of discriminatory practices. He shared emails from airline executives discussing ways to maintain exclusivity in first class. He described meetings where managers used coded language to discuss passenger demographics. During the lunch break, Sarah's phone buzzed with news alerts. Major airlines were already announcing reviews of their boarding practices. Civil rights organizations were calling for industry-wide investigations. The case had sparked a national conversation about discrimination in air travel. The afternoon session brought a surprise witness, a data analyst who had worked in the airline's corporate office. He presented statistics showing that black passengers with first-class tickets were 7 times more likely to be questioned about their tickets than white passengers. Look at these numbers, the analyst explained, pointing to charts displayed on the courtroom screen. Over the past 5 years, there's been a clear pattern of discrimination. It's not random, it's systematic. The airline's defense strategy began to collapse when Amanda presented internal communications between executives. Emails discussed ways to discourage certain demographics from booking first-class tickets. Marketing materials consistently showed only white passengers in first-class advertisements. This wasn't just about one incident or one gate agent, Amanda argued. This was a corporate culture that encouraged discrimination while carefully hiding it behind coded language and unofficial policies. Late in the afternoon, a former airline executive took the stand. He had recently retired and decided to speak out. His testimony was devastating. Yes, we knew about these practices, he admitted. We received complaints, but they were always handled quietly. Settlement agreements with confidentiality clauses kept everything hidden. We calculated it was cheaper to pay off the occasional complaint than to change our practices. Sarah noticed several jury members shaking their heads in disgust as the executive described how complaints were systematically buried. One juror was openly taking notes, her expression growing more concerned with each revelation. As the day drew to a close, the airline's legal team looked defeated. Their carefully constructed defense had been shattered by their own people's testimony. The truth about years of systematic discrimination was finally coming to light. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed around Sarah and her legal team. Dr. Bennett, what do you hope to achieve with this case? One reporter called out. Sarah faced the cameras with quiet dignity. This case isn't just about one airline or one incident. It's about exposing a system that has allowed discrimination to hide behind policies and procedures. Change only happens when people are brave enough to speak up. As she drove home that evening, Sarah received a text from her daughter. Mom, you're trending again. People are calling this case a turning point for civil rights in corporate America. The trial wasn't over, but the day's testimonies had made one thing clear. This case would change the airline industry forever. The 7th day of the trial brought unexpected drama as news media from around the world packed the courthouse. The story had grown beyond a single discrimination case. It had become a symbol of the fight against corporate racism. Sarah arrived at court to find hundreds of supporters outside, many holding signs with messages like "Justice for Dr. Bennett" and "End Airline Discrimination Now." Inside the courtroom, Amanda Chen prepared to present their most powerful evidence yet. Your Honor, she announced, we've received thousands of emails and messages from passengers sharing similar experiences. Today, we'll hear from just a few of them. The first witness was a retired judge who had been denied first-class boarding 3 times in the past year. Then came a famous musician, followed by a corporate CEO. Each story followed the same pattern: valid first-class tickets, unnecessary questioning, delayed or denied boarding. Look at their frequent flyer accounts, Amanda pointed out. These aren't inexperienced travelers. They're professionals who fly first class regularly. The only thing they have in common is their race. During the lunch break, Sarah received an unexpected call. The airline's CEO wanted to meet privately. In a small conference room, surrounded by lawyers, he made his pitch. "Dr. Bennett," he began, "we're prepared to offer a historic settlement. $20 million, plus guaranteed changes to our policies. We'll create a diversity board, implement new training programs, everything you've asked for." Sarah looked at Amanda, who nodded slightly. This was more than they'd expected, but before Sarah could respond, her phone buzzed with a news alert. Other airlines were already facing similar lawsuits. Her case had sparked a movement. "No," Sarah said firmly. "This needs to play out in public. Real change doesn't happen behind closed doors." Back in court, the afternoon session brought forward current airline employees who had risked their jobs to testify. Flight attendants described unwritten rules about seating arrangements. Gate agents revealed coded systems for flagging certain passengers. "We were told to watch for passengers who might make others uncomfortable," one flight attendant testified. "We all knew what that meant, but nobody said it out loud." Social media exploded with support. #JusticeDorBennett was trending worldwide. Other industries were facing similar scrutiny as people shared stories of discrimination in hotels, restaurants, and retail stores. The airline's legal team tried one last defense strategy, arguing that individual employees had acted against company policy. But Amanda was ready. She presented internal performance reviews showing that employees who questioned these practices were often passed over for promotions. This wasn't about rogue employees, Amanda argued. This was about a corporate culture that rewarded discrimination while pretending to promote diversity. Late in the day, Sarah's medical colleagues arrived to testify about her character and professional standing. Dr. Patricia Williams, her longtime friend, described Sarah's dedication to her patients and her profession. "Dr. Bennett has performed over 1,000 successful brain surgeries," Dr. Williams testified. "She saved countless lives, yet she was treated like a criminal for trying to board a flight she had paid for." The public gallery erupted in murmurs when Amanda revealed one final piece of evidence: a leaked email from an airline executive written just days before the incident. It discussed ways to maintain our premium cabin's exclusive atmosphere and discourage certain elements from booking first class. As the day ended, reporters cornered the airline's lawyers outside the courthouse. The questions were brutal. How long had these practices been in place? How many other complaints had been buried? Why had it taken a lawsuit to address these issues? Sarah's phone rang as she left the courthouse. It was her daughter Jasmine. "Mom, my teacher used your case in our civil rights class today. She said you're making history." That evening, Sarah sat in Amanda's office, reviewing the day's events. The wall behind them was covered with photos and documents, evidence of years of systematic discrimination finally exposed to public view. "Tomorrow is closing arguments," Amanda said. "The jury has seen everything. They know this wasn't just about one incident. This was about changing an entire system." Sarah nodded, thinking about all the people who had come forward to share their stories. This case had become something bigger than her. It had become a movement for change. As she drove home that night, Sarah passed the airport. The lights of planes taking off and landing dotted the sky. Soon, she thought, those flights would carry passengers judged not by their appearance, but by the tickets they held. Real change was finally coming. On the final day of the trial, the federal courthouse was surrounded by news crews from around the world. Inside the packed courtroom, Sarah sat calmly as Amanda Chen delivered her closing argument. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Amanda began, "over the past 2 weeks, you've seen overwhelming evidence of systematic discrimination. This wasn't about one incident or one employee. This was about an entire corporate culture built on prejudice and hidden behind policy." At 2:15 p.m., the jury left to deliberate. Sarah waited in a small conference room with her legal team, her daughter Jasmine holding her hand. Hours passed. News channels ran constant coverage of the case, calling it a landmark moment in civil rights history. Finally, at 6:45 p.m., word came that the jury had reached a verdict. The courtroom fell silent as the jury foreman stood. In the matter of Bennett versus Atlantic Airways, we find in favor of the plaintiff, the foreman announced. We award compensatory damages of $25 million and punitive damages of $175 million. But the monetary award wasn't the most significant part. The jury also mandated sweeping changes: independent oversight of boarding practices, mandatory anti-discrimination training, regular audits of passenger treatment, and public reporting of discrimination complaints. The courtroom erupted in applause. Sarah remained seated, tears quietly rolling down her cheeks. This wasn't just her victory. It was a victory for everyone who had ever faced discrimination and stayed silent. Outside the courthouse, Sarah faced the media. Today's verdict isn't about money, she declared. It's about accountability. It's about saying that no corporation is too big to be held responsible for discrimination. Change is possible, but only if we're brave enough to demand it. Within hours, other major airlines announced comprehensive reviews of their practices. Civil rights organizations reported a surge in people coming forward with similar stories. The case had opened floodgates of change across the entire industry. 1 week after the verdict, Sarah received a call from the Congressional Black Caucus. They wanted her to testify about airline discrimination at an upcoming hearing. Her case had sparked a movement for federal legislation to prevent similar discrimination across all transportation sectors. Sarah established the Bennett Foundation for Transportation Equality, using part of the settlement money to help other victims of discrimination fight for justice. The foundation would provide legal support, document cases of discrimination, and push for industry-wide changes. Her first action was to hire Karen Miller, the former gate agent who had testified against the airline. Karen now worked training other companies on recognizing and preventing discrimination. Her insider perspective proved invaluable in identifying hidden discriminatory practices. 2 months after the verdict, Sarah boarded her first flight since the incident. As she walked to her first-class seat, she noticed the changes. The gate agents were more professional, treating all passengers with equal respect. The flight attendants were more diverse. Even the airline's advertisements now showed people of all backgrounds in first class. At the hospital where she worked, Sarah's colleagues had organized a celebration. Dr. Patricia Williams raised a toast to Sarah, who reminded us that being a healer isn't just about fixing bodies, it's about healing society's wounds too. Jasmine, now preparing for medical school herself, looked at her mother with pride. "Mom, remember when you told me that sometimes one person has to stand up so others can walk tall? You did that. You really did that." 1 year after the verdict, Sarah attended a national conference on corporate accountability. As she took the stage to deliver the keynote address, she saw faces of all colors in the audience. Many were young professionals who had been inspired by her case to fight against discrimination in their own industries. "Change doesn't happen by accident," Sarah told them. "It happens when we refuse to accept discrimination as normal. It happens when we stand up, speak out, and demand better." The airline industry had transformed. New federal guidelines required transparency in boarding practices. Discrimination complaints were down 80%. Other industries were following suit, recognizing that diversity wasn't just right, it was good business. As Sarah ended her speech, she shared the message that had driven her throughout the trial. Justice isn't always convenient. It isn't always comfortable. But when we fight for it together, justice is always possible. The case of Dr. Sarah Bennett had started with one incident at one gate, but it ended by opening doors for countless others, proving that courage, truth, and persistence could indeed change the world.